Well, Happy New Year, Sam. And to those of you listening, Sam, how's it going?
It is going great. And you know what? I'm really happy to have you here. You're
Yeah,
here, Josh. You're
Rainer on
here.
leadership. We are here.
Right.
You know what?
Yes.
You
Rainer
know
on
what it
leadership.
feels like? It feels like when you're watching a football game, normally the NFL or something, and the previous game goes long. And so they'll start to be, there's this lag. And then all of a sudden, the announcers of the game that I'm watching will go, and we welcome all of you who have just joined us from the Chicago game. This is what's happening. That's kind of like we welcome all of you from EST to Rainer on Leadership. Glad that you made the leap with us.
Yeah. So let's just take a moment to explain what exactly is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of the listeners here at Rainer on Leadership, we are new to them. So there's a lot of people that don't know they're new that are new. So we have listeners that are
Everybody's
coming over.
yeah,
We have listeners that are coming over from EST, which is where you and I had a podcast. So
right.
we're bringing the conversation to Rainer on Leadership. And there's been people that have been listening to Rainer on Leadership that are like, who is this Josh guy?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because you're new to them.
Right.
So Rainer on Leadership is now going to have 2 weekly episodes.
I love
What
it.
it's always been with me
Mm-hmm.
and my dad and guests, and also me and Josh. So you
Mm-hmm.
get 2 of me. So if I was like the lesser part of Rainer on Leadership to you, I'm sorry. But
Deal with it.
that's what's
Yeah.
happening. And for those of you who are tuning in from EST and you've come over here to Rainer on Leadership,
Yeah.
thank you. Because Josh and I have been doing this a long
Very
time,
long
like
time.
10,
And the
10 years.
conversations, the topics were very similar. And so these are a perfect marriage. It's going to work to help as many church leaders as possible, whether they're in established churches, different various roles, new churches. This is going to be the one-stop shop twice a week for you to develop as a leader of churches.
Exactly. And we do have a new sponsor. They've sponsored some things before. They've sponsored some things at EST.
They
And
did.
they're not new per se, but they're new to this spot. And that's the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Mm-hmm.
Southern, as it's sometimes called, as many of you may know. That is where I went to school. My dad was a dean there. I used to mow the grass there. So how about that? I used to mow Dr. Moeller's yard, and now they're sponsoring my podcast. If you'd have told 20-year-old Sam, 19-year-old Sam, yeah, you're going to have a podcast and this institution is going to be sponsoring you, I'd say, what's a podcast and why
Right.
on earth?
Yeah, back in that
Would they be doing that? So we're actually really glad to have Southern as a sponsor of the show. They've got a new fully online PhD program.
Oh,
How
wow.
about that? Fully online PhD program. And obviously, when you're talking about Southern, you're talking about a top tier seminary. Like they are often, when people rank seminaries, they are often at the very top of that list, if not number one. So this is
Right.
your opportunity to get in on something that is new, fresh, and exciting. So they have a
Cool.
Doctor of Philosophy and Christian Studies at Southern. It's not just a series of recorded lectures. Scholars in this program will experience live interactions with the same professors who teach at Southern Seminary's Louisville campus. So you definitely want to be a part of this. The PhD in Christian Studies includes seminars in New Testament and Old Testament exposition, historical theology, biblical theology, ethics, leadership, and discipleship. So come join the long line of ministry faithfulness that dates back to 1892, when they launched their first seminary-based doctoral degree in North America. So link in the show notes there so that you can go check it out. Again, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, their new fully online PhD program. Thank you, Southern, for sponsoring today's episode.
Yeah. And the reality is, even though Sam and I both are seminary educated, advanced degrees, terminate degrees even, and with a lot of years of experience doing church leadership, there's just quite a few things that we just have not figured out. So I kind of feel like this show, the things that we have not figured out, is almost like this declaration out into the universe to say, here's the stuff I can't figure out. If any of y'all have figured it out, then let us know. because there's a lot of hard stuff that takes a long time to figure out. And once you do feel like you got a handle on it, everything changes.
Yeah. So good point. If you do have some thoughts, Adam, if you're on YouTube,
Yeah,
that's
throw it
me.
in
That's
there.
my typing noise.
Hmm.
Adam down in the comments. We are getting more and more comments on YouTube, more and more viewers on YouTube. So
Hmm.
it's becoming
Cool.
a popular place for podcasts.
Welcome to the show.
Please,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Please give us your thoughts. All right. So the older you get, you either become more self-aware or you stop caring. I think it's one of two things. Like there's only two people, two
Hmm.
kinds of old people:
Yeah.
self-aware people and people who don't care. And that is a gross oversimplification and not true, but it's one way to think about things. So hopefully you are in that category of becoming more self-aware. And it's just you. It's like going to a PhD program, right? Like the one
Hmm.
Southern's offering. What's a PhD good for? Well, lots of things, but one thing that it's good for is helping you realize all the things that you don't know. When
Right.
I started my PhD program, it was like, I am an idiot. I don't know any of
Hmm.
this stuff. Um, so it's just same with aging and getting older. And so, in your 30s and 40s, I think is when this really kicks in. And it's like, you know what? I don't have everything figured out.
Yeah, I think that's
So,
true.
Josh, what's
Hmm.
one thing you don't have figured out? We're now both in our 40s. You, what say you?
Oh man, there is just so much. I know we have a list of things that, but not things that we need to necessarily talk about. But there's just sort of a balance, personally, between the pastor role and the boss role at church, in any various sizes of church. That's probably the biggest one, that really creeps into my weekly. Am I doing this right? Am I pastoring? Because a lot of times pastoring feels like it needs to be very grace based, which it should be. Uh, but then bossing feels like it should be very discipline based or goal oriented. And sometimes those things can run aground. But that's one of the balancing things. I know a lot of people, that may not be the issue, but the other balance would be between like work and family. Very similar, but between your work and your family, and that sort of tug of war that feels like, my kids have all this stuff to do. Perfect example today, I just had a couple of church parties that I had to go to. And then tonight I have two committee meetings. And somewhere in between that, I have to make the 30-minute round track to get a kid and get them back to the church campus. And I feel torn. That balance there. That's not something that I normally feel, but I know a lot of people do.
I certainly do. And I think that's a
Mhm.
good way to put it. That boss and pastor role.
Mhm.
Man, I still struggle with that. I was actually talking last night with my wife, and it was a good conversation. Everything is like actually in a good place in my life right now. I was like, it's still, but even then, it's still hard. It's kind of lonely being a lead pastor because I
Yeah.
was like, you don't really have like friends in the church that you can go to and talk about things like an underperforming staff member or something like that,
Right.
or a new strategy that you really shouldn't share until you have more
Mhm.
insight. And
Mhm.
it's just hard. I've got good friends at the church and I've got good friends on staff, but at the end of the day, I'm still their boss.
Yeah.
I'm more than their pastor. I'm
Mhm.
also their boss. And how do I balance that? I'm still trying to figure that out. I don't know that I have that figured out. And like you, there are two Christmas parties I've got to go to tonight, which I'm really looking forward to.
Mhm.
And this was being recorded right around the Christmas season,
Sure.
and I have to go. I think I have to pick up a kid. I still have yet to figure that out. I probably need to as soon as I get off these podcasts. And I also need to pick up a fan for a bedroom. Somehow,
Wow.
some way, swing by Home Depot and pick up a fan.
Yeah.
Now, in the grand scheme of life, that ain't nothing, but
Right.
it's still one of those days. It's like every day is like that. Like, oh my goodness, I have 40 different places to be, and I have no idea how I'm going to get there and do it
Yeah, and
all.
I think that you probably, not to just point at problems, but maybe to share a little bit about how there could be some wisdom in this if you are feeling that way. Although, like I said, this particular one's not one I struggle with a lot. And what I try to encourage my staff and other people is this whole thing is nobody, honestly, almost no one is expecting you to be perfect. So there are times where you just say, I just came from this thing. I'm sorry I'm late. And they don't care. They don't. They're like, that's totally cool, but in our minds, we get really stressed out. I had to tell somebody the other day, I got to go pick up my kid to do this thing. So if I'm able to make it there, I would love to be there. But it doesn't look like I'm going to likely be able to be there. And so just kind of communicating that to people helps them understand that work balance stuff, some of it is in our heads. So there's a thing that we can block out.
And if anyone can tell me how to comb my hair, that would be helpful. So I have a lot of gray hair. For anyone who's never seen me and you've only heard me on the podcast, I have a ton of gray hair. And for those of you watching me on YouTube, like I'm looking at myself right now in this camera,
Hmm.
and it sticks straight up. And yes, I do use product because I have to, because otherwise I would just look like a freak.
Just let it
Um,
go one day. Just walk around just like this is how I woke up. I'm going with this.
I've thought about growing it out.
Yeah.
I have, but
Hmm.
I have very thick, poofy hair.
Oh,
So,
really? Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. That has nothing to do with anything. Uh, Creeping cynicism is also a struggle. So, the older you get, the more you realize this world is really jacked up, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it other than to bring the good news of Jesus Christ, which is the solution to everything. And the more you learn about politics, whether it be local or national, you're
Hmm.
like, I'm not gonna be able to solve this problem. The more you dig into like nonprofit ministry, the more it's like, wow, there's a lot of junk here. And I say that as somebody who is on a board of a nonprofit. I serve a church, and there's so much good, but you also begin to become more aware of the junk that's out there,
That's true.
and you can just become a cynic. It's really easy to become cynical about church life
It
because
is.
you've lived long enough to see all these scandals, see the nasty underbelly, and it's just like you just kind of become you get to the point where you assume that every church is bad, and every person has
Yeah.
these issues. It's like,
Hmm.
well, every church does have problems and every person does have issues. That's why we got to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very tempting. Cynicism can creep up because you spend a great deal of your time working on things, working through problems, working with people. And a lot of it has nothing to do with what it is that you feel like you are called to do. Um, I surrendered to vocational ministry, a calling there when I was 14. And there are times where in cynicism, I will say, this is not what 14-year-old Josh signed up for. Like I never, and to be honest with you, even though most of the time, 90% of the time, that's just fine. You don't know what life is like when you're 14. Uh, there are those times where I just look around and go, none of this is anywhere close to what I thought it was going to be. I didn't know that this is what ministry was going to be. So again, not to just point at the issue, but to give some ray of hope to those who are struggling with that or in that, I would just encourage you to realize that cynicism has a lot to do with your unreasonable expectations on whatever it is you thought it was going to be. There's no path forward. There's no leading people, whether it's nonprofit or politics or school boards or whatever, or for profit, in which stuff doesn't go wrong. I mean, stuff goes wrong, and there's somebody that gets their feelings hurt. So once you can just kind of accept that that's a reality, then the cynicism goes away, and you start to celebrate progress, as opposed to being mad if you don't get a touchdown. The way that I always share it with people is like, look, I know we want to get a touchdown every play, but you're not going to. Just a couple of yards every play, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. So just take the couple yards and they'll add up to a touchdown. So that's how I combat cynicism in my own life.
So one of the things I want to do is just take a moment and pause and give you a proper introduction, because there are probably some Rainer on Leadership listeners who are like, Josh, I think I've heard of this guy. Who who I know most of our listeners, in fact,
Hmm.
probably the vast majority of them know who you are.
Yeah,
But just
probably.
in case,
Yeah.
who are you?
Josh. I'm Josh King. I'm a North Texan through and through. Very much Texas. All things Texas, including those Longhorns that people love to hate out of sheer envy. I'm
And
also
at the
just
time when this airs, we're going to know if they're national champions or not, right?
Oh, by that time, yeah, we will know. So that'll be an interesting thing. Um, uh, I've got a bachelor's in biblical studies, a master's in evangelism, church growth, a doctorate in what do they call that? Strategic leadership, doctor of ministry in strategic leadership. And Sam and I have been podcasting together for a very long time. I think we said the other day, maybe 10 years or so. I've
Not
pastored
quite
a number
10.
of
I think it's
churches, and
around like 9, but
yeah.
who's counting?
Yeah, and I've pastored a number of churches, and now I'm pastoring a church here in North Texas, sort of right in the middle of that big giant DFW metroplex, and I love it. I enjoy it, and I'm glad to be on Rainer on Leadership. Longtime respecter of Rainer on Leadership, and now a quarter host of the
We'll just
show.
call you a co-host. Yeah, it's
Uh,
quarter host.
I'm quarter host of the show. Yeah, so
That's kind of
cool.
like me. That's kind of like me saying I'm a quarter Jew, right?
I'm quarter
Which
host.
is true. I think it's quarter, an eighth, something like that. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
so the temptation to cruise is always
Mm,
there. I am feeling this right now. This
mm,
is me, and I am still like trying to work through it because my family life is stable. My wife and children are very happy and doing well.
mm,
The church, though we still got a lot of work to do, and you know we're not where I want us to be, but growing steadily with young
mm.
families, and it's a pretty well-oiled machine right now at West
Mhm,
Bradenton, and it is not as much work as it used to be when we were really going through the heat of revitalization. So it would be so easy just to put cruise control on because I feel like I'm
mm,
very well respected, very well loved. Of course, the church would hold me accountable if I got out of the line. And if I went into cruising mode, they would probably say something to me. But man, that's tempting.
mm.
And it's just this constant, kind of like creeping cynicism is a constant struggle. This temptation to cruise is just always there for me. You're probably not quite there at Louisville yet, I would assume, because you're relatively new.
I'm not. It's also not in my personality. Where I struggle, and it's not in yours either, and that's probably why you haven't, even though you could. Where I really struggle with this, what I haven't figured out about this is how common it is. You look around and you go, okay, that is so common that at some point I'm going to struggle with this, or at some point I'm going to look up and feel as though it's okay to just be on cruise mode. In fact, I served with a guy once who just constantly, he would always say he just wanted to set the dial and rip the knob off, that it would just be so much better to just coast, just do church. And there, and I struggled with that because I felt like, well, that's not leadership. That's coasting, and we're not called to just coast. But look, it is appealing. It's not just appealing from a lazy standpoint, but it's also appealing from I guess we could say, a political standpoint. If you're just coasting along, you make a lot less people upset. You don't upset the apple cart, and so it's a lot easier to cruise along in that way. I think I haven't figured out why do so many people get there, and then how do you avoid it? Because I don't ever want to rip the knob off. I want to constantly be leading toward better, and no matter how good things are, uh, I feel like until I die, God has put me in a situation to help it be better, more like Christ wants it to be. So I guess that's where I struggle with figuring out why do so many people get there, and what do I do to avoid that in my own life?
Yeah, it's. I just think it's easy. I just think people. Why do people do that? Default mode is pretty easy,
Yeah.
and they kind of fall into it. Another thing that I still am just working through 20 years into ministry is the feelings of inadequacy. Like I
Mm.
still have occasional nightmares where I get up to preach and nobody's there.
Hmm.
That's like this, which is weird because I started in a church of 6 people, and there were definitely some Sundays where like, you know, there was 4 people there, 6 people there, and I know what that's like to preach to an empty room.
Hmm.
But I guess that the size of church that we are at West Bradenton, like everyone just decided, yeah, we're tired of hearing from this guy. We're going to go someplace else. Uh, and and I just have to be real about those feelings. And I don't know that they will ever go away. I guess we all have our insecurities. We all have these feelings of inadequacy, but I certainly haven't conquered them yet.
No, and I haven't either. A couple of weeks ago, we had a rainy. It was really cold. It was the first like real cold day, and it was very rainy. And we were down by 300, lower than our regular attendance. And so that was one of those kind of feelings that's just like, man, we're just not quite there where we need to be yet. The inadequacy thing for me, I would say it's a little bit more, or it's nuanced because of my preaching and because of like my leadership. There's some areas where I really feel like I shine, but then there's just because we wear so many hats as church leaders, back to that whole idea of being a pastor and a boss. One of the things that I really struggle with is just normal Josh, right? Just normal me. I am always nervous that people don't want that guy. Nobody wants to be around normal Josh. And one of the most hurtful things that you'll hear people say is just this comment about, like, well, he's one way on the stage, but he's different in personal conversations. And as I unpack that with them, you'll hear things like, you're just much more like a character and fluid and lively when you're preaching. And my retort is always, yeah, it's a different setting. I'm standing in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. I have a 30-minute prepared speech with an opening story, some illustrations, that kind of stuff. But when you just stop me in the hall, or if you want to sit down and talk to me for 45 minutes or so, I'm listening. I don't have a closing illustration about something funny that my son did to share with you. That's just not real. And so there's an inadequacy thing there because I do believe very often, and I think in the previous churches that I've served in, particularly the last one, there was this infatuation, there was this love for the performer. And then there was just like, yeah, well, if you're not doing anything for me, I don't need you. And that sort of insecurity, that constant feeling of not truly being accepted for who you are and only what you can do for people, that's something that sticks around. The more you hear it and the longer that you serve, that's why some of these things, as we get older in ministry, they're new things. They build up. They become new problems that I didn't have early on in my ministry. I just assumed people probably just saw me first as a person and then as a preacher. But I have learned in 25 years of ministry, they see you first as a preacher, and then whether or not they'll accept the person, I don't know. So that's a real insecurity for me.
All right, rapid fire, rapid
Yeah.
fire.
Hmm.
Some real practical things that I haven't figured out yet. So I'll do mine first, and then you
Okay.
can you can add to them. All
Good.
right, I because I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Right.
I have yet to figure out how to keep the Christmas series fresh. I'm living it right now. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, man, I'm just going to use the same point I did 5 years ago because no one's going to remember. Even though I don't redo sermons, I mean, I
Sure.
really try to write them fresh. There's still
Hmm.
like, I'm like, how do I've preached the escape to Egypt like 4 times. I've been here 9 years, and my Christmas series is a month long. I mean, you start adding up all the texts that talk about the Christmas story, and it's like, I've done this one. I don't know how to do. I've
Yeah.
done it
Yeah.
4 times. I don't know how to do it again. So that's
Hmm.
number one.
Okay.
Reaching single people. I
Mm.
used to be one in
So
a
hard.
church that had a great
Yeah.
singles ministry. Guess
Hmm.
what? And we do have obviously a decent singles. Those that are in it at West Braden are great. It's just not big
Hmm.
enough.
Hmm.
And then getting everyone to tithe. I know there's a lot of different theological viewpoints on that of whether it's a valid approach or not, but I think it is. I believe that people should be tithing, but I certainly have not done a good job of getting everyone in my church to tithe. All right, so those are my
Yeah.
three. What you give us 2 or 3 or 4 of things that you have yet to figure out.
I mean, that whole balance between being a normal person that we've talked about a couple times in these different, that's just, I just cannot figure it out. I'll tell you, another one is the whole like fun pastor situation. So, I was responsible. This is my first Christmas with this staff. I was responsible for essentially planning and executing the Christmas party. I'm just not, I don't know how to do that in a way that like everybody loves. And when people start complaining about things, it really gets under my skin, makes me feel like, okay, they hate this party. Like I'm not really good at that. And there's some pastors, or I guess staff that do really great, like monthly socials, and they have the staff chapel and the Chris. I don't know how to do any of that. I haven't figured out how to do it. I try to do it and people complain. I don't do it. People complain, that kind of stuff. So I really kind of get locked up in that. I think those are the major things. I think the other big one, similar to reaching single people, is racial diversity. I just, like I'm a white dude. Sorry, but I am, and I just don't know how to fix that. And it
But you
feels
married a
like
Cuban.
I did marry a Cuban, and one of my children is black, and yet at the same time, there's this
No,
constant.
no, your kids all. I don't know. I don't know if I should share this or not, but I will. But all of your children have different skin tones. It's
They
really kind
do.
of.
It's various shades. Um, my oldest is very pale, like me. My second is very dark, Hispanic looking, and then my youngest is black. And and so I just can't figure it out. Every time I've ever tried to hire, I'm looking for people of color, and I can't get any to apply to the churches or move to podunk, middle of nowhere, Arkansas. It's just the hardest things in the world, to try to figure out that racial diversity piece. But keep trying. I'm going to keep trying at all of this, and hopefully I'll figure it out one day. But those are the probably the rapid fire things.
Well, here's one thing that you can have figured out, and that is your church management software systems.
That's
I
right.
finally did a segue decently.
That's a good one.
Church Teams is a long-time sponsor over at the EST podcast. They have been so gracious to come over here to Rainer on Leadership. So if you've been listening to EST, you know about Church Teams, but some of you who have been part of Rainer on Leadership may not. They do church management software just about as good as anybody else. It's a scalable system. They've got price points for everyone, large church or small church. They have a package for you. So they help you with your systems. So guests, volunteers, pastoral care, all of those things can be siloed and sporadic. What they do is they bring them all together in one system. So, are you tired of not being able to get the help you need for your software? Well, Church Teams can support you. They will support your staff if you have a staff, or if you're just a sole pastor, they can help you as well. So calling, texting, all of that stuff they do. Integrated. It's all integrated. It's easy to use, and they do very good reports as well. Entirely customizable. So learn more at Church Teams, and the link for that is in the show notes. But if you are listening, you can just go to go.churchteams.com. Again, go.churchteams.com. Well, first one with me. Well, not our first podcast together, but our first one together on Rainer on Leadership. How about it? Thank you, Southern Seminary. Thank you, Church Teams. We do love our sponsors. This is how we're able to provide our content for free. So, Josh, you have historically signed us off at
That's
EST. Right. So, you know what? Do us the honors.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and we will catch you again next week.